As schools became the battleground in Westminster today, just a few miles away, some children at this South London school were concentrating in the classroom again. Here, Year 10 students have been invited to come back one day a week. And with around 60 children in the building each day, social distancing can still be maintained.
I've missed it a lot, like seeing my teachers, feeling comfortable around them, like learning, seeing my friends also. Obviously, if you haven't seen your friends in a while, you just want to speak to them a lot. So keeping a 2-metre distance, you keep forgetting.
How is it coming back to school?
Coming back is great.
What was it like at home?
At home, it's like hard. But I'm learning new things about my family. Like before, I didn't even know that my mum could play PS4.
That's quite a nice thing to find out.
Yeah.
Remote learning has been a challenge for many. 50% of pupils at this school are disadvantaged. In England, the government has pledged to deliver laptops and routers to families who need them. But so far, only around half of these have been dispatched.
So there's an unseen digital divide. People wouldn't necessarily like to say the circumstances. So we had one boy who said he had access at home. Well, he was working on an old smartphone. The face-to-face contact, which you'll hear our students talk about, nothing can replace being in a classroom with your peers, with the teachers, who can work with you in a sensory way. You can see if someone doesn't understand something by how they're looking. The time we've lost, for me, is significant, particularly for my students at this school.
At Prime Minister's questions, when the leader of the opposition raised concerns about disadvantaged children, Boris Johnson blamed Labour councils.
We're being to encourage all kids who can go back to school to go back to school now because their schools are safe. It's the most disadvantaged kids, Mr. Speaker, who need to go back to school.
Labour says schools haven't been able to fully open because of government failure. At the Education Select Committee, unions were in the firing line.
The NASUWT has not been engaged in any campaign to keep schools closed.
I'm sorry, Dr. Roach, if that's the case, then why is it that every time I see a teaching union on TV, they're saying schools aren't safe to open, schools aren't safe to open? A campaign has been run, whether you like it or not, to breed fear into parents about the idea of sending their kids back to school.
The government says it's working towards all children in England being back in September. 1,500 of the UK's leading paediatricians are now calling on the Prime Minister to urgently publish a clear plan for back to school as part of a national recovery programme for children.
This is a balance of risks, and there's growing evidence of harms coming to children, from mental health, from lack of exercise and sleep, through to real concerning reports of injuries and violence to children.
As he left the House of Commons, a protester caused the Prime Minister's vehicle to end up in a minor car crash.
Oh my God!
Boris Johnson will be hoping that doesn't become a metaphor for his schools policy.
Well, earlier I spoke to Robert Halfon, who chairs the Commons Education Select Committee, and Dr Mary Bousted, who's Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union.
I really worry that parents and children will be able to access Primark over the next 3 months, but many of them won't be able to go to school. Studies released by academics over the past couple of days have suggested that more than 2 million children are not doing any school homework at all, and 4 million have had very little contact with teachers. And I worry that we're potentially, I know there is a risk, of course, of the coronavirus, and we have to be careful about that, but there's also a huge risk to children's mental health, not being at school, a potential epidemic of educational poverty, a safeguarding crisis. And we have to weigh up all these risks when we decide whether or not the schools should open to more children.
Mary Bousted, MPs at the Select Committee this afternoon were pretty angry with what they saw as your obstructive role. Was their anger justified?
I was very surprised by the MPs this morning. They seem to think that unions have the power to close schools and open schools, and actually that's the government's power to do that. The government closed schools on the advice of SAGE and on scientific advice. Now, we want schools to be reopened, but we don't know what the situation will be like in September. So we're saying you need to do 3 things. First of all, you need to start now looking at how you increase the space for schools. So if there is social distancing, we need education to be taking place in public buildings so that the pressure on the school site is less. The second thing we need is there's lots of teachers who have just qualified who won't be able to get jobs because schools aren't hiring, because teachers aren't moving. So give them jobs attach them to local schools so that if social distancing is still needed, class sizes can be smaller. And the third thing is we do need a proper plan, as they have in Scotland, for blended learning, for learning both at school and supporting learning at home.
Robert Halfon, Mary Bousted says it's not the union's fault, but a failure of government leadership.
Clearly, some of the unions have been quite vehement in opposing school openings, but of course the government could do better in communicating the guidance. I accept that, but what I also think that we have to consider, we have to ask the question, at what point does the risk to children's educational futures start to outweigh the immediate health risk? The World Health Organization has said that it's safe. 22 European countries have sent their kids back to school and said that it's safe. The chief medical officer has said the same. So why on earth are we imposing conditions that are no other workplace is imposing?
Well, these are the government's...
Mary Bousted, if you could respond to that point.
Yeah, these are the government's conditions. I absolutely agree that it is very, very important to get children and young people back to education as soon as we can. It's very dangerous to make international comparisons. Many of the countries we make international comparisons with, for example, Denmark, locked down much earlier, have had much less incidence of the virus, and when they came back, there was rigid social distancing and the use of public buildings and the use of more teachers brought back into the profession.
Mary mentioned Denmark, but France, similar situation as we've been, has opened 44,000 schools. They've had 70 cases of infection that were linked to reopening. We have to have a can-do spirit to open our schools. We can't set 5 conditions that no other workplace sets. And what I don't understand, all those 5 conditions that the
halls, you put marquees up in playgrounds. Yeah. Would your members be prepared to work through the summer in those conditions to allow children to catch up the education they've missed?
We do think there should be a summer holiday catch-up plan. We think that many teachers may volunteer to do summer catch-up. We think newly qualified teachers would, many of them would very much like to do that because it gives them a route into education. Youth workers, community workers. We want a national plan to catch up.
Well, Robert Halfon, it sounds like Mary Bousted is warming to your idea of Nightingale schools, similar to the Nightingale hospitals that were thrown up in weeks. Is there the basis of a deal here?
I'd strongly welcome if Mary is saying that schools should go back and support for summer schools. I just worry what has been said in the past in terms of social distancing rules making it impossible for schools to open, because whatever happens, unless clearly the infection rate goes well over 1, the R rate, we have to get our kids back in school by September, if not before.
Robert Halfon, Mary Bousted, thank you very much.